Allegra Spender, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, David.
So what do you think of Donald Trump's tariff threats and how do you think Australia should respond?
Look, I think there are three things here. Firstly, we should expect disruption, both from these tariff threats, but also from this presidency, and we need to be ready for it. The second piece is how we respond, and part of that is building our own competitiveness, working on our own productivity, because the world's changing and we're going to have to be in the best economic position for it. But finally, I think Jackie's got a lot right when she says that we do need to stand up. We do need to be assertive about what's in Australia's interest, but why Australia is such an important partner to the US, both militarily and strategically, but frankly, economically. The US has a trade surplus with Australia. They're exporting more to us than they're importing. It's good economics to have a good relationship with Australia.
And so does part of that standing up to Trump here, should that involve referring to the fact that we have a lot of critical minerals that the US might like? We have this AUKUS arrangement. So should some of these things be on the table?
I think absolutely. I think we need to recognise that the relationship between the US and Australia is quite profound. It's strategic, it's military. There are a lot of US troops based in Australia, as you say, critical minerals which are critical for the US as well as for the rest of the world. And I think we need to be able to assert those appropriately, because those are the strengths that Australia brings. We need to be able to make our own choices, but I think the US needs to be clear on the value that we bring to the relationship.
So should we be saying to Donald Trump, the AUKUS deal is at stake here and access to critical minerals is at stake here?
I think the threats is not the point.
Right.
I think it's asserting what we bring to the party. And I think that the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull did that really well. He understood what was in the US interest. He understood what was in Australia's interest. He wasn't afraid to assert Australia's interests, but he also recognised and made the case very strongly of what was in the US's interest as well.
Let's turn to the electoral funding laws the two major parties passed during the week that were strongly opposed by you and other independents. Do you think there should be any limit on how much can be spent to win a seat?
Look, I think there should be limits around electoral spending. I stood in the last election really strongly against the Clive Palmer $100 million in politics. And I think, frankly, what people wanted from the electoral reform was to get the big money out of politics and to make sure that politics was still a place that there was contest, and there was really good contest. You just saw in that poll that you saw reference earlier, a third of the country wants to vote for someone who's not the major parties. So a third of the country is saying, we want choice. And I think it's critical that the reform delivers on those two things. And I think, frankly, the reform has really fallen short, both in getting money out of politics and also on making sure there's a level playing field.
You spent, I think it was just over $2 million in your campaign in Wentworth. This would limit spending to $800,000 per candidate. Do you have an issue with that limit?
Look, I don't have an issue actually with the limit of $800,000. My concern, however, is that I can only spend $800,000 as an independent. A coalition or a Labor Party, they can spend $800,000 with the name of the candidate running against me, and then they can spend an unlimited amount, frankly, else just with Labor or Liberal or a party name.
I think it's a $90 million limit on that
$90 million.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That can go a long way in a seat like Wentworth. And so the point is that, everyone knows how much I spent in the last campaign. We don't know how much Dave Sharma spent in the last campaign. We don't know how much Tony Abbott spent or Josh Frydenberg spent in fighting the independents. And I think it is that sense that this idea of spending caps I support, but this idea that, the major parties can spend as much as they want as long as they don't put their candidate's name in the title, I think is another example of unfairness.
But my understanding is these laws, yes, you can only spend $800,000, but Climate 200, a separate entity, can still spend up to $11 million on helping you in your campaign.
Look, I think we're still unclear on how all these laws are playing out. But I think this comes back to the challenge, right? Which is these laws did not go through a parliamentary process. You have people working in the transparency space, people like the Centre for Public Integrity, Transparency International, all these groups standing up saying the process of rushing these laws through. It's bad for our electoral system. This is bad for trust in politics. And when you look at a deal where the major parties are on a unity ticket on one side saying this is good for the country, and you have the transparency and the democracy people on the other side saying this isn't good for the country, I think we should be really clear on who we should be trusting in this situation.
So, I mean, just to pick up on your point, if parties can run a national campaign and spend up to $90 million, but you can't because you're an independent, you can only spend 800 grand in your seat. Should you and like-minded independents, Teals, as they're often called, form a party to take advantage of these rules?
Look, I'm an independent. I'm really proud to be an independent, and I think what my community is asking for are people who stand up for their community, who listen to the experts and really focus on what's important to the community. So I want to be able to run as an independent, and frankly, I know that there are lots of people around the country, lots of electorates around the country who want someone who's really focused on them, and I think this is the real challenge that we've got with this electoral reform.
But given this change, it's now law, it's backed by both major parties. Do you need to give consideration to a change here? To form a party, you could still have the freedom to vote whichever way you want in the parliament, whatever rules you decide on, but a party structure to take advantage of these funding laws?
Look, I think what we should try and do is actually change the laws. They have passed through, just pushed through just last week. And I think that's what we should be focused on, is having the proper parliamentary scrutiny over these laws, make sure that we get them right and actually reform in the next parliament. That's what the major parties should be committing to, and that's what I will continue to push them for. So
this is something that you would be pushing in the event of a hung parliament for either major party to come back to rewriting these laws?
I think, yes, with the proper scrutiny. What I want to see is good process, a good parliamentary process where all these issues are really fleshed out, where the community can actually listen to the experts arguing about these laws, and so we can get to an answer that is going to get big money out of politics, but make sure there's a level playing field.
OK, but just to be clear, you're not interested in forming a party?
No.
OK.
I said I'm really happy to be an independent.
No, I get
Thanks,
that.
David.
OK. So, look, just on the prospects of a hung parliament, we had the poll earlier that's, again, showing that this is likely to happen. I know you've been asked many times which way you might go. Can I ask you how you would approach that decision in a hung parliament? Which side to back? What will you be weighing? OK.
So I think, firstly, I think the first question will really be about making sure that we have stable government, which is really critical, but also making sure that we have action on the priorities that sort of my community and many others around Australia have stood for, because these are some of the big issues that we're facing as a country. So around action on climate change is really critical, making sure we stay the course there. Making sure that we are supporting young people to get ahead, particularly on housing, but also looking at tax, because I think young people are falling behind and it is bad for the whole country. And then finally, driving productivity and innovation in our businesses, because it is only through productivity and innovation that we can actually, as a country, get ahead. Those are really three critical pieces in terms of making those decisions. But as you say, we have to wait to see where the numbers fall and see what happens. But what I will also be doing is not just about, the day of forming government. It's also about how you approach decisions in the parliament. And myself and I think others on the crossbench have approached in decisions in the parliament and how we vote and what we support, really on the basis of what does the evidence say? Is this in our long-term interests? What do our communities think? What do the experts think? And bringing that together, backing good ideas from all sides, working with all sides to try and get good policy through. And that's how I will continue to behave, whatever form the next parliament takes. I
want to come back to some of those policy issues you mentioned there, but I'm intrigued that your first priority was the stability of government, a stable government. So would the side of politics that has more seats than the other be an important factor for you?
Oh, look, it is one of the factors, but I think you need to look at what the shape of the crossbench looks like and what the shape of that support is. So that is certainly a factor, but I think we need to see how this plays out. It's very unclear exactly what it's going to look like in the end.
Peter Dutton has said this morning that if he has more seats than Labor, crossbenchers should back him in a minority government.
Yes, I'm sure that's what he thinks, and I think it really will depend on the numbers and the shape of the crossbench, and what people are willing, to negotiate and back at that time. So I think we need to really look at it at the time.
You're saying it's not necessarily the case that the party with the most seats gets your support?
Not necessarily, but it's certainly a factor that I will consider.
He's also said this week that the Green Teals, as he likes to call you and your colleagues, will never support a coalition. If you vote for one of the Teal independents, you're voting for a minority Albanese government, he says. What do you say to that?
I say that I have been explicit time and time again that I will work with either of the major parties in terms of forming government. And I want to draw a couple of things. One is, I worked pretty closely with the coalition on things like the industrial relations reform, because I believe that this is where my view on the world and the coalition's view on the world, there is a lot of parallels, there's a lot of sympathy. But on issues in relation to climate, I haven't worked with the coalition because I don't think they are committed to a transition in terms of the most cost-effective and, frankly, good for the climate transition that we have at the moment. So my point is I take things on the basis of the arguments and on the basis of the evidence, and I'm very open to working with a coalition government, and I'm open to working with the Labor government, but that depends on what they're actually going to put on the table and the seriousness, frankly, of what they're putting on the table as well.
So would you ever support the idea of nuclear power in Australia?
Look, I've never been anti-nuclear power in Australia, but my big point I think that we need to make is that we have the next 10 years is what really matters in terms of this energy transition. Now, even putting climate aside, the issue is that 90% of our coal-fired power stations are going to close in the next 10 years. So we need to transition in the next 10 years. No one is saying nuclear is an option within the next 10 years. And so we need to do that in a way that is reliable, that is cost-effective and is right for the environment. And I think that is it's staying the course, actually, backing renewables, giving businesses the certainty to continue to invest, and I keep an open mind on nuclear, but I think the numbers as they stack up, do not stack up.
And when you talk about tax reform, boosting productivity, and helping the young in particular, tax reform can mean different things to different people. Just a couple of ideas. Do you think we should look at bringing back some sort of mining tax?
Look, what I said one of the things I'm most proud of doing this year, during this term, has been to put forward a tax green paper. And I put that because, and really I consulted experts, I worked with people like Ken Henry, I worked with the BCA, I worked with ACOS, I worked with the ACTU. And what I sought to do in that is to say, what are the big issues that we're facing as a country? And the big issues economically that we're facing as a country, I think one are the fact that our young people are falling behind, and housing is part of that. Secondly, that we are not investing enough in our businesses, where our productivity is in the doldrums. And finally, that the energy transition is going to cost us more than it should if we don't deal with tax. So I come back to those three things and then say, well, what are the tax settings that can help us drive or fix those three problems? And, so I have put everything on the table. I have, in that green paper, said, we should consider how we tax our resources. We should consider, for instance, how the PRRT works and whether we could get more from our taxation. So those are all the issues on the table. And what I'm seeking through that is how do we have a process around tax reform that actually deals with the really big issues that the country is facing.
And what about an estate tax on big inheritances? Would that help young people get a better deal?
So not a single economist has actually suggested that to me, and so no, that is not one of the things that has been put on the table, and certainly not one that I've ever put on the table.
Finally, anti-Semitism and hate speech, a big concern, particularly, of course, in your electorate. Peter Dutton's calling for a debate after the shocking video of those two nurses in Sydney this week, calling for a debate on migration and citizenship arrangements in Australia. What do you think? Is that something we need to look at as part of this?
Look, I think that video was absolutely shocking, and speaking to Jewish members of my community, the fact that they may go into a healthcare facility in this country and feel that they are at some sort of risk is appalling. And so it was completely shocking. So I think that we need to make sure that we do have protections in place for Australians. But I think we also need to be clear that we already have strong laws around citizenship. We already have strong laws about deporting people who have dual citizenship and those issues. What I think we really need to be focused on is actually around things like hate speech laws. And I said that in the Parliament, and I've been calling on the Coalition and the government to back me. And the reason is that, we need to stop, I think, anti-Semitism at its source, and part of that is about the hate that gets provoked and the hate that gets whipped up, particularly by some of the hate preachers, but also by some of the neo-Nazi people who've been particularly persecuting the LGBTQI community as well. Those people who are promoting hate in our community, they help drive the sort of anti-Semitism, the disgusting behaviour we saw on that video, and that's where I think we need to start. I don't think we can simply just change our immigration laws and that's going to fix it. I think that we actually need to do that. And then the second piece is we need to get back to building relationships across our communities, because that is also critical to our cohesion as a community and is a really good antidote to hate.
Allegra Spender, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much, David.